The heart of man, it seems, is a curious place. We are wired to compare ourselves, to measure our own imperfect existence against the polished highlights reels of others. We look outward, endlessly scrolling through the curated perfection lives seem to achieve elsewhere. There is an immediate ache in this comparison, a subtle but pervasive feeling of inadequacy. We see snapshots of joy, success, and effortless happiness, yet we assume these single images represent a complete life, a life free from struggle, doubt, or necessary imperfection. We mistake presentation for reality. And so, our mind becomes a perpetual judge, comparing the messy truth of who we are, right now, with an impossible standard set by strangers. This comparison is more than just passing observation. It settles into the marrow of our belief system. It teaches us that our inherent worth must be validated externally. We begin to chase approval like a desperate tide chasing the moon, always looking elsewhere for the gravitational pull that stabilizes the self. The constant internal whispers become exhausting. I am not enough. I do not measure up. Others seem to possess something essential that escapes me. The weight of comparison, my friends, is nothing less than stolen peace. It diverts our gaze from the fertile ground beneath our own feet. We are so busy looking at what others have that we fail to appreciate the unique gravity and singular beauty of our own experience. This anxiety isn't about objective reality. It is a judgment cast upon ourselves based on an artificial, selective assembly of other people's best moments. It creates a corrosive cycle. We feel insufficient, so we seek more information. We scroll deeper into the endless feeds, trying to solve that aching lack through sheer volume of data, through stories, news, and boasts. We believe that knowing more will make us better, that external knowledge can fill an internal void. This quest for reassurance leads us into a treacherous space, the echo chamber mind. Here, we are overwhelmed by voices. Too many perspectives clash at once. The bombardment of information, both good and bad, becomes meaningless noise. We mistake volume for wisdom, quantity of opinion for truth itself. Our thinking becomes frantic, reactive. Every little bit of negativity, every minor disaster reported on a screen, feels like a direct indictment of our own flawed existence. We become experts in doom scrolling, the act of willingly submerging oneself in the worst-case scenarios and the most distressing reports imaginable. It is a paralyzing state, an endless consumption of external chaos. We treat our minds like open receptacles, constantly filling them with the anxieties of strangers, believing that by simply consuming enough information, we will somehow process or predict away all potential unhappiness. But the mind, when overfilled and unanchored, does not gain clarity. It merely accelerates its panic. It loses the capacity to distinguish between what is urgent and what is merely loud. We are trapped in a cycle of reactive thinking, where our emotions dictate our response before any rational thought can intervene. It demands an interruption, a pause so profound that it feels like stopping time entirely. This required intervention comes not from more data, but from a quiet moment of profound questioning, a gentle redirection away from the noise and back toward the self. The philosophical guide does not offer comfort. He does not tell us which scroll to avoid or how many times we must meditate to cleanse our minds. Instead, he asks a single question that acts like a sudden, cold sheet of water thrown over the overheated furnace of our modern anxiety. What is truly within your control? This question shatters the illusion of omnipresent accountability. It forces the sprawling, panicked self to confront the boundaries of its own sphere of influence. The initial shock is immense. Our natural tendency is to point outward, to traffic patterns, global economies, other people's moods. even the algorithms that feed us anxiety. But upon deeper contemplation, we must begin drawing a boundary. We are taught, slowly and arduously, to visualize two distinct spheres of existence. In one sphere lies everything external, the erratic nature of the world, the unpredictable whims of others, accidents, global crises. All these things operate entirely outside our will or direct command. In the second, far smaller but infinitely more powerful sphere, resides only our internal response. This is where we find the locus of freedom. It is the space between stimulus and reaction. It is the quality of our judgment when faced with setback. It is the decision to observe an event without immediately adopting it as a statement about who we are. The weight shifts entirely. The monumental burden of controlling outcomes, the perfect career, the flawless relationship, the ideal social life, dissolves because those things were never mine to command in the first place. What I control is my internal citadel, my judgment, my intention, and my subsequent choice of action. This realization does not eliminate difficulty. Rather, it redefines its scope. Now, when disappointment arrives or misfortune knocks at the door, we no longer react with a desperate flailing. We pause. We practice prediction. Instead of fearing the sudden loss or the canceled plan, we engage in a mental rehearsal of failure. What is the worst that could truly happen? It is usually survivable. The ability to predict and mentally manage the potential negative outcomes strips it of its initial emotional shock value. The power here is preparation. By accepting the possibility of the setback before it happens, we neutralize the panic when it finally arrives. We are armored not by luck but by contemplation. This leads us to a profound concept: acceptance of what is. The struggle against reality, the storm on the beach, the unexpected difficulty in life is the ultimate form of resistance. It is futile. Instead, we must learn to embrace Amor, Fati, the love of fate. We do not simply endure bad things, we incorporate them into the fabric of who we are, recognizing that even the jagged blow from the wave serves a purpose in shaping the resilience of the rock. We understand that resistance is suffering. Acceptance is freedom. To embrace what is, fully and without complaint, is to find peace not despite hardship, but because of it. It transforms the passive suffering of victimhood into the active strength of belonging. This disciplined mindset now guides us when our efforts are uncertain. We must commit ourselves wholly to the action, to the presentation, to the difficult conversation, to the sheer act of living fully. But critically, we practice letting go of the outcome. We detach from the need for external validation. Our sole metric becomes the purity and integrity of our own effort. The praise or criticism of others ceases to be the yardstick against which we measure our virtue. The continuous journey involves visualizing loss. This is not morbid speculation. It is intellectual armor. By intentionally imagining the loss of possessions, the failure of plans, even the deep sting of rejection, we perform a service for our current happiness. We realize that while these losses are undesirable, they do not equate to utter ruin. In fact, this exercise cultivates a profound and almost overwhelming gratitude for the gifts, and indeed the simple present moment, that we often take for granted. The difference between responding and reacting is enormous. A reaction is automatic. It flows from primal impulse, anger lashing out when unfairly judged, fear demanding retreat. A response, however, requires a deliberate pause, a breath taken solely for oneself. It allows the rational mind, which has cultivated discipline over time, to intercede. We choose our words. We choose our posture. We intervene between the hot charge of emotion and the measured reply of reason. Eventually, we learn the great luxury, the luxury of boredom. The modern world fears silence because it implies nothing to consume. Yet, it is in this emptiness that genuine self-reflection can finally surface. When the external noise stops, the internal noise, the true thoughts, the unedited emotional currents, can be heard clearly. Boredom becomes a fertile ground for wisdom. The culmination of this practice is finding virtue's inherent currency. It is found not in grand gestures or recognized accomplishments, but in quiet, unnoticed acts of justice and wisdom toward others. When we act purely from an internal commitment to doing good, when the motivation is character itself, the resulting satisfaction is pure, clean, and entirely self-contained. Life continues with its inevitable inconveniences, the minor setback, the physical discomfort, the sudden financial pressure. In the past, these would have sent us spiraling into panic, treated as catastrophes that proved our inadequacy. Now, we learn to address them rationally. We treat the hardship not as a personal failing, but as neutral data, information about life's impermanence. It is just one more facet of being human. The journey culminates in a view from true tranquility. The overwhelming chaos of comparison finally recedes. We look upon the world, the grand sweep of history, the indifferent beauty of nature, and we see it without the need to possess, measure, or categorize its value according to our own fragile self-worth. There is an enormous lightness that descends. The final realization is this: Stoicism is not a suppression of feeling. It is the affirmation of freedom. It is the magnificent freedom to choose where we place the currency of our attention and emotion. We are freed from the tyranny of external events. We own the internal architecture of our own minds. This practice, this careful tending of the inner self, is the most noble endeavor a human spirit can undertake. The journey continues forever, an endless commitment to mindful engagement, finding peace not in perfect circumstances, but within the enduring discipline of the soul itself. The stream of information never stops. It flows relentlessly, a deluge of voices and headlines meant to occupy every vacant moment of our consciousness. We chase the next notification, drawn into a whirlpool of immediate concern or fleeting outrage. In this constant torrent, we mistake noise for knowledge, believing that sheer volume equals wisdom. The mind becomes an echo chamber, reinforcing the most dramatic, the most polarizing, or simply the loudest thought we encountered moments before. This digital stream simulates community, yet it breeds profound isolation. We find ourselves trapped in personalized realities, bubbles constructed of algorithms and shared agreement. Within these chambers, our own perspectives are not challenged by genuine contradiction, but merely echoed back to us, polished until they gleam with false certainty. It feels safe, contained, even nourishing. Yet this manufactured consensus is fundamentally brittle. The anxiety we felt earlier, the constant dread of not enough, finds a new outlet here. The relentless need to be right, or at least to react publicly. We are perpetually performing our indignation, accumulating not wisdom, but emotional debt. Every disagreement becomes a battle for identity. Every news cycle demands an immediate, perfectly worded response. Our thoughts become cheap currency, traded quickly and often without deep reflection. This frantic state of perpetual reaction is exhausting. It drains the vital reserve needed to simply be. To stop scrolling, even momentarily, feels like resisting gravity. We cling to the familiar panic because the quiet truth, the difficult self-examination that true peace requires, feels too vast and unsupported. The mind, starved for stimulation, prefers the seductive chaos of the crowd. The philosophical guide's earlier questions seemed impossibly simple when surrounded by this noise. They implied a stillness, an internal anchor, But our modern lives seem to demand constant movement, constant input. We treat our minds like external storage devices, assuming that if we just download enough data, enough opinions, or enough compelling drama, the core anxiety will finally be overwritten. The realization dawns slowly, painfully. The frantic search for answers outside the self is simply a distraction from the necessary work within. The overwhelming nature of the world, the injustices glimpsed, the political divides screamed about, the sheer volume of human misery catalogued, becomes paralyzing. If everything is broken, what do we do? Paralyzed by empathy and information overload, we fall back into the comfort of reactive cycles. The echoing mind mistakes intense engagement for meaning. It conflates being informed with being wise. We mistake the ability to articulate a strong opinion for having undergone deep self-reflection. The volume increases, but clarity diminishes. Each passing day reinforces a pattern. Absorb outrage, feel compelled to respond, experience temporary catharsis, and repeat. We are becoming expertly conditioned consumers of manufactured emotional drama. This is where the true struggle lies. It is not against external forces, the algorithms, the politicians, or even friends with differing views. It is against the internal mechanism that craves external validation for its most basic functions. The temptation is always to outsource our judgment, to say, the noise will tell me how I should feel, or the majority consensus must be correct. The journey back starts by deliberately unplugging, by forcing silence upon an overly stimulated system. This forced stillness is terrifying. It feels like sensory deprivation in a hyper-connected world. The initial moments are marked by restlessness, by the phantom vibration of a notification that never comes. The hands twitch toward the screen, an involuntary reaching for the familiar dopamine hit. We confront the terrifying void where continuous stimulation used to be. In this silence, the echoes start to fade. What remains is not silence itself, but something deeper, the distinct voice of our own untainted judgment. It is a whisper against the cacophony, asking a simple question that no amount of external data can answer. What do I actually believe when no one is watching? This confrontation with self-sufficiency is intensely lonely and infinitely more liberating than any consensus ever was. We must learn to listen past the noise, to filter out the outrage bait and the fear-mongering, and instead recognize the steady, quiet hum of reality. The echoing mind wants us to shout. Wisdom asks us to pause and breathe. It teaches us that true strength is found not in having the loudest opinion, but in owning the quiet confidence of our own reasoned response. This is the beginning of mastering the inner world, recognizing it as the only territory truly under our control. The steady hum of life continued around her, an indistinguishable wash of motion and noise. She had spent so long seeking anchors in the external world, in the curated joy of a friend's feed, the assumed success visible on a passing stranger's vehicle, the applause awaiting her perfect performance. These searching eyes were always looking outward, believing that fulfillment resided somewhere beyond her own skin, waiting to be found with enough likes or enough achievements. This desperate reaching had worn down her spirit, leaving her depleted and brittle. She lived in a state of perpetual comparison, measuring her messy reality against the polished highlight reel of others. It was exhausting work, trying to construct an identity worthy of admiration. She carried this weight of expectation like a heavy shawl, draping it over every interaction. Every setback felt catastrophic, confirming some deep-seated fear that she was fundamentally flawed, perpetually not enough. The anxiety was a low thrum in her chest, an insistent soundtrack to her ordinary days. She mistook movement for progress and busyness for meaning. It was this very cycle of seeking external validation that had led her into the echo chamber mind, trapping her amidst the noise. There, information streams became addictive. They offered the illusion of understanding without demanding any actual thought. The constant flow of opinion felt safer than true silence, because consensus, even if manufactured and negative, promised structure. She traded introspection for distraction, confusing sheer volume with profound wisdom. Till one evening, when finally unplugged from the frantic current of digital life, she found herself standing aimlessly at a quiet corner street. She was still gripped by that familiar restlessness, the urge to search for an answer in the next feed or the next conversation. Then he appeared. He moved with the gentle economy of someone whose inner life had achieved a profound stillness. His presence demanded nothing. It simply existed. He did not speak immediately, and she waited, caught between her yearning for quick advice and her reluctant acceptance of the moment's quietude. Finally, he broke the silence, but what followed was no lecture, no grand philosophical pronouncement designed to rearrange her worldview in a single breath. He simply asked a question, a gentle, profound query that did not seek knowledge from her, but rather forced her to interrogate the very foundations of her perceived struggle. It wasn't about overcoming anxiety or mastering comparison. It was simpler and far more devastatingly difficult. He asked her what she truly controlled. That single sentence landed in the hollow space where all her anxious chatter usually resided. It stopped her frantic cycle dead. What did he mean? She wondered. Every instinct in her overstimulated mind screamed for a complex answer, a multi-layered treatise on human nature or societal injustice. But the question hung in the air, demanding only clarity of focus. He was not asking about reputation or talent, things others might see and praise. He was pointing toward the irreducible core of existence. What is within your jurisdiction? Where does the sphere of your self-sovereignty begin and where does it end? She spent a long moment just considering the weight of those words, control. She instinctively thought of outcomes, grades, relationships, job promotions, even simply whether it would rain tomorrow. These were things that slipped away like water through cupped hands. Then her mind flicked to other people's feelings, their moods dictated by external stimuli, beyond her will. The list was long, spanning mountains and fickle hearts alike. He remained patient, observing her internal wrestling match with the calm expectation of a teacher guiding a student who is resistant to truth. He let the weight of his questions settle deeper into the pit of her being, forcing her gaze away from the things she desperately wished she could change. The struggle was an immediate and jarring cognitive clash. She realized that her entire life construct had been built upon the belief that if she just optimized enough, if she controlled her friends' perceptions, or secured a perfect career path, then peace would follow. She believed effort equated to control, and that striving could somehow build walls strong enough around her internal world to keep out all disappointment. But his quiet question demolished the edifice of this delusion. It did not offer a solution. It merely highlighted the narrow parameters of her genuine power. He was forcing her attention inward, into the only unshakable territory she possessed. It took years of anxious striving to understand that control is not about managing the chaos outside. It is about mastering the space immediately surrounding one's mind. The judgments, the interpretations, and the initial response itself. These internal mechanisms, those swift, automatic narratives that assign value or blame, are entirely her own jurisdiction. His question became a profound lens through which she started to view every ensuing moment of her life. Everything else, the unexpected delay, the harsh critique, the indifferent crowd, was suddenly categorized. External data points, requiring only an internal filtering mechanism. This intellectual shift was not merely theory. It demanded a fundamental restructuring of her relationship with reality itself. It meant accepting that she could never control the action, but she could choose how to own the ensuing reaction. And in choosing that small space of response, she finally began to reclaim her peace. The mentor's gentle question echoed in a profound silence. What do you truly control? It was not a command to solve the problem, but merely an opening of a door that had been tightly shut by decades of anxious habit. For so long, her mind had operated on the false premise that peace lay just beyond the reach of controlling external variables. The traffic flow, the mood of others, the decisions of colleagues. She had spent her life striving to build walls against unpredictable fortune. The notion was heavy, an intellectual weight she struggled to carry. How could she detach so completely? Her instincts screamed that caring meant acting, that effort demanded measurable results, and that letting go was synonymous with surrender or weakness. The comparison trap taught her to measure self-worth by external achievement. The echo chamber taught her to mistake noise for necessary input. She remembered how easily she had slipped back into old patterns. The immediate reach for her phone when faced with quiet, the urge to interpret silence as deficiency. Her struggle was not against bad events, but against the exhausting habit of misplaced concern. She wanted certainty in a world defined by flux. The guiding philosophy revealed itself through simple geometry, two distinct spheres of influence. The first sphere encompassed everything outside her skin, the actions of others, the fickle demands of fate, random misfortune, the inevitable passage of time. This was the sphere of indifference, things that merely happen, indifferent to her will or desire for control. The second, internal sphere was far smaller but infinitely more significant. It contained only judgment, only response, the raw processing between event and action. Everything else, the heat on her skin, the cold rain, a harsh word spoken by another person, passed through this crucible of choice. Here lay the single locus of freedom. The weight shifted entirely to this internal circle. She began to see that, while she could not mandate the sky's color or the kindness of strangers, she could absolutely mandate her own viewpoint on those things. The event itself was neutral. It was the story she told herself about the event that held all the power. This realization was terrifying in its scope. It meant accepting responsibility for every internal narrative, no matter how comfortable or familiar. It dissolved the comforting illusion of external fault. If she felt anxiety because of a bad outcome, the true source was not the outcome itself, but her judgment about the catastrophic nature of that outcome. The journey demanded an unprecedented stillness. She had to learn to observe her own mind as if it were belonging to someone else, to watch the rush of what-if thoughts without grabbing them or feeding their intensity. Judgment, she discovered, was not a passive reflection. It was a choice, a momentary assent to a belief about reality. To practice this differentiation was not merely an intellectual exercise, it was physiological labor. It meant stopping in the moment of stress and asking the guiding question again. Is this something I can control? If the answer is no, if it belongs to the sphere of external events, then its force upon my inner peace must be acknowledged as minimal, if not negligible. The effort required to pull back from the tidal wave of worry was exhausting. She practiced separating objective reality from subjective meaning. A colleague missed a deadline. The old response was panic, spiraling into self-blame and anger at others for disrupting her carefully planned routine. The new discipline forced her to pause, acknowledge the late submission as a simple fact, a piece of data, and reject the emotional judgment that attached to it. This failure means I am inadequate. She separated the event from the indictment. This quiet mastery over internal consent was the deepest challenge. It required cultivating an inner fortress built not of avoidance, but of clear-eyed acceptance. By recognizing that her true self resided solely in the quality of her response, in the calm dignity with which she faced unexpected friction, she began to understand freedom on its truest terms. The vast expanse of external chaos still existed, unrulily behaving crowds, unpredictable markets, sudden disappointments. These things would continue to buffet her life. But now, she possessed an inner gyroscope. She no longer fought the current. Instead, she simply adjusted her bearing within the boat of her own mind. The locus of power had been meticulously moved inward, leaving the outside world, for all its noise and turmoil, with only a limited capacity to truly wound. Having learned to distinguish the uncontrollable external world from the sovereign territory of our own minds, a new kind of anticipation settled upon her. The struggle had shifted entirely from managing outcomes to mastering judgment. Yet, even with this newfound inner resilience, life retained its capacity for minor disruptions. We are human. We expect smooth transitions and reliable paths. And often, the expectation is violated by something small, mundane, yet keenly felt in the moment. This chapter explores the quiet preparation required when prediction meets reality. The world does not pause simply because our minds prepare for inconvenience. Today, she faced a predictable pattern of imperfection, a reminder that just because we understand control doesn't mean we master time itself. She learned that intellectual understanding must be translated into embodied calm. The lesson was subtle but profound. The difference between reacting with panic and pausing with wisdom when faced with genuine disappointment. It is easy to visualize failure in the abstract, the loss of reputation, or the inability to achieve a grand goal. But what about the small failures? The missed connection, the slight inconvenience that derails a carefully laid plan. These moments often carry disproportionate emotional weight because they violate our sense of smooth forward momentum. Before this moment, her internal gyroscope was calibrated for large-scale psychological upheavals, the comparison trap, the echo chamber's noise. Now, she needed to master the minor catastrophe, learning that true emotional peace is not the absence of bumps in the road, but the predictable smoothness of one's own response when those bumps inevitably appear. She envisioned a scenario far removed from grand philosophical treatises, a missed transit connection. The routine was established, the destination assured, the timeline precise. This expectation formed a fragile scaffold around her immediate peace. Then, the predictable deviation occurred. A delay, a cancellation, or perhaps simply missing the optimal window of departure. Initially, the familiar surge arrived, a flash of frustration, a tightening in the chest fueled by misplaced urgency. The old self, the version obsessed with controlling every variable from comparison to confirmation, would have immediately engaged in internal protest, a battle against what was not going right. But this time, something shifted. This disruption became an unexpected gift of clarity. Instead of succumbing to the initial emotional wave, she instinctively paused. She forced herself into a momentary vacuum of reactive thought. It was within that suspended breath, that brief hiatus between stimulus and response, that the power of prediction truly manifested. The concept of negative visualization, once a quiet exercise in journaling, became a necessary, lived skill set. It wasn't enough merely to think about things going wrong. She had to practice the calm acceptance of those failures when they actually materialized. She began mentally running through possible responses. If the train was delayed by 30 minutes, what would be the logical next steps? What alternative routes existed? She moved past the question of blame, the frustration directed at the schedule, or the system, or the late passenger, and focused instead on agency. The only thing she controlled was the mental loop that followed the disruption. She could choose to spiral into anxious rumination about the wasted time and broken routine, or she could engage in a pragmatic process of assessment. This realization proved utterly liberating. The mind, when faced with unexpected minor inconvenience, tends toward emotional escalation because it equates deviation with personal failure or injustice. It assumes that the world owes us a predictable experience. But the Stoic wisdom whispers a quieter truth. The universe is indifferent to our schedules. It simply is. To predict and prepare for this indifference is not to become cynical, but profoundly grounded. She realized that by mentally rehearsing the worst-case minor scenario, the canceled meeting, the delayed ride, the necessary detour, she stripped the event of its emotional potency. The anxiety did not come from the cancellation itself. It came from the unpreparedness for the cancellation. By having practiced the mental script in advance, the crisis diminished to merely a problem set requiring solutions, stripping away the layers of perceived catastrophe. The practice transformed her anticipation from a fragile state of hopeful expectation into a powerful tool of cognitive defense. She was no longer waiting for life to meet her expectations. She was proactively preparing her inner resources for whatever life decided to deliver. The goal shifted from preventing disappointment entirely, an impossibility, to minimizing the time and emotional expenditure spent recovering from it. This ability to pivot quickly, based on reasoned preparation rather than panic-driven reaction, became a defining hallmark of her rediscovered self. This capacity for predictive calmness extended beyond physical logistics and touched upon interpersonal expectations as well. We often assume that others will act rationally, or at least in alignment with our own needs. The power of prediction demanded she prepare not just for external forces like weather or schedules, but also for the unpredictable variability of human character. She had to anticipate arguments, miscommunications, and disappointments caused by people's inherent limitations, their tiredness, their bad mood, their focus on themselves. This level of preparation was exhausting at first, requiring a constant state of mindful readiness, but with repetition came an effortless grace. She understood that anticipating setbacks is not pessimism. It is rigorous, actionable realism. It is accepting that life will be messy and building the internal structure strong enough to absorb that mess without fracturing. The quiet power of prediction taught her that true freedom lies in knowing that even when everything else fails, when the plan collapses, or the expectation evaporates, the core self remains intact, responsive, and whole. This resilience was not a shield against difficulty, but an inner calm derived from thoughtful foreknowledge. The path to tranquility is seldom a gentle slope. It is often a turbulent coast, demanding that we confront the raw power of what simply is. In previous chapters, we learned to distinguish between what we can control, the quiet judgment within our own minds, and the vast, unpredictable currents of the external world. We found strength in accepting that anxiety often blooms from resistance, the desperate desire for reality to conform to our expectations. This realization leads us to a profound and demanding concept, Amor, Fati, to love your fate. It is not merely tolerance. It is an embrace so deep, so thorough that you welcome every single event, the stunning peak of joy, the crushing depth of sorrow, the mundane monotony of days between, as necessary fuel for your becoming. The mind tends to pick apart reality, finding fault in everything that deviates from a perfect narrative. We look back and lament the failures. We curse the coincidences, and we mourn the paths not taken. Yet, true wisdom teaches us that nothing is wasted. Every setback contains a seed of necessary strength. If you wish for a different outcome, you must first accept the reality of what has occurred. Only from this foundation of acceptance can meaningful change begin. Imagine standing before the immense power of nature, watching waves relentlessly crash against ancient stone. The rocks do not fight the water. They do not plead with it to cease. Instead, they meet the onslaught with unyielding presence. They accept the force and use it. The erosion becomes their shaping hand. This quiet endurance is what Amor Fati demands of us. This acceptance shifts our entire relationship with difficulty. Difficulty ceases to be something that happens to us. It becomes something we are in. We learn to stop asking, "Why me?" and instead ask, "What is this teaching me?" The storms do not arrive to punish us. They arrive because the internal landscape requires reshaping. The struggle here lies in letting go of narrative control. We want life's plot to be logical, linear, and rewarding. But reality refuses that neat structure. It delivers chaos, randomness, genuine hardship, and moments that simply defy sense. The art is finding peace not by demanding order from the world, but by cultivating an internal order robust enough to endure any external disorder. This means transforming our view of suffering. Suffering is often misunderstood as merely a negative event, but Stoicism reveals it to be an opportunity for practice, a gymnasium for the soul. The pain of loss teaches us gratitude when we have. Disappointment teaches us resilience even when things fail. Adversity, therefore, is not the opposite of happiness. It is its very crucible. We must learn that fate is not a random sequence of cruelties, but a tapestry woven with purpose. Everything that happens, the cold weather, the missed opportunity, the unexpected rejection, is part of the design necessary for us to exercise our virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. To reject it is to reject our own unfolding character. The challenge now becomes integration. It is integrating the lessons learned from every perceived failure. It means realizing that if we could predict all future suffering, we would lose the ability to appreciate anything at all. The shock of the unexpected remains vital for our growth. We move beyond merely enduring what happens. We begin to actively prefer what happens. When life presents us with a significant difficulty, perhaps an illness or an insurmountable obstacle, the natural, fearful response is to resist it and mourn its existence. But embracing Amor Fati means saying, "This struggle, right now, is the perfect challenge for my character today. This unexpected loss will make me deeper. This discomfort will temper me into something stronger." This practice requires constant humility. It demands that we accept our own limitations and the vast complexity of others. We must treat ourselves as students perpetually in training, understanding that perfection is not a destination, but a continuous act of compassionate engagement with reality. To love one's fate is to become fully present for every unfolding moment, embracing its full scope without reservation or rebellion. This radical acceptance is not resignation. It is the highest form of freedom. The journey toward inner peace is often misunderstood. Many believe that tranquility means the absence of difficulty or the achievement of perfect happiness. But we have learned, through comparing ourselves to others and drowning our minds in endless noise, that this understanding is a fragile illusion. The echoes of comparison and external expectations still whisper: the need for applause, the yearning for validation from outside sources. We are conditioned to believe that if only we can achieve enough recognition, or if only life stabilizes itself into a predictable rhythm, then peace will finally arrive. This relentless focus on outcome remains our greatest vulnerability. We have been taught to control things, controlling other people's opinions, predicting the near future, arranging events for optimal pleasure. We mistake these desired outcomes for true freedom. Yet, as we approach this moment of focused action, the truth must be reaffirmed. The energy spent trying to guarantee a perfect result is the very energy that keeps us anxious. The mind recoils from uncertainty. It craves certainty like a child grasps at a known object. But life itself, by its nature, resists fixed points. The wind shifts direction, people change their minds, and even our most meticulous plans are subject to the unpredictable current of existence. To struggle against this variability is exhausting, leading only to disappointment, a predictable emotional consequence when reality fails to match expectation. The realization that requires such painful detachment is understanding where we draw the boundary between self and world. We must commit wholeheartedly to the process, to the effort, but simultaneously practice a radical release of attachment to what comes next. This is not apathy. It is strategic freedom. It is recognizing that by letting go of the need for a specific result, we paradoxically gain the capacity to act with pure integrity. Imagine yourself preparing for an important presentation or engaging in a difficult conversation. Your preparation is meticulous. You have trained your voice, gathered your thoughts, and honed your arguments through deep introspection. The commitment to quality effort is absolute. But once you step into that arena, the stage, the boardroom, the challenging dialogue, you must consciously execute one crucial mental move, releasing ownership of the result. You are doing your best work. You are speaking with wisdom. You are being prepared. These are all internal acts of dedication and skill. The reaction of the audience, the praise received, or even whether the idea is accepted, belongs to a sphere entirely outside your control. To cling to needing that approval turns your performance into a desperate plea, draining your power. The Stoic path teaches us to divorce effort from result. Our duty is simply to provide the excellent work, the highest quality of our own judgment and action in that moment. Everything else, praise, criticism, indifference, rejection, or overwhelming acclaim, is merely raw data provided by the world. It has no inherent power over your inner state unless you choose to grant it one. This is the hardest lesson for a mind trained on external affirmation. We have spent so long seeking mirrors to confirm our worth that we have forgotten how to generate value from within. To detach means accepting that our self-worth cannot be quantified by others' reactions. It must be generated solely by the moral quality of our character. This detachment is not a surrender. It is a masterful reclaiming of personal sovereignty. It means becoming so anchored in your own inner standard of excellence, your commitment to truthful judgment and diligent effort, that external fluctuations become background noise, like the tide moving against indifferent rocks. The storm can rage, but you remain steady. We learn that perfection is not a single target to be hit. It is the unwavering application of virtue in every imperfect moment. We do not aim for perfect acceptance or guaranteed success. We aim for the flawless execution of our moral duty, doing what is right, speaking the truth, and meeting challenge with courage. The deep comfort found here is recognizing that failure, as an outcome, does not equate to personal failing. It simply means the endeavor did not meet external expectations. And while disappointment hurts, Its grip diminishes when we focus entirely on the virtue of our effort itself. The reward shifts from receiving praise to having lived up to one's own internalized code. This ongoing practice requires constant vigilance. When a sudden setback occurs, or when the response is underwhelming, the ingrained reflex will be to judge it harshly, to feel cheated, inadequate, or deeply disappointed. In these moments, we must pause, acknowledging that judgment itself is merely an internal event, one subject entirely to our choice. We return to the clarity found previously. Can I truly control this outcome? No. Therefore, my focus shifts completely to what I can control: my attention, my breath, and the reasoned structure of my immediate reply. The ability to observe a difficult situation without immediately attaching suffering to it is the ultimate testament to self-mastery. The life lived by attachment to outcomes is a life lived in constant emotional oscillation, high on praise, low on criticism, eternally unsettled. But the life lived from detachment is one of steady dignity. It recognizes the inherent randomness and beauty of existence, honoring the effort simply for its own sake, not for the reward it promises. This freedom is the ultimate prize, the freedom to be fully present, wholly committed, and utterly unburdened by the imagined consequences. To live this way is to finally realize that the quietest victory, the one against your own anxious mind, is worth more than any accolade from the world. We have learned to observe the world without being swept away by its currents. We understand now that our freedom does not lie in controlling traffic or predicting tomorrow's weather, but in mastering the quiet judgment we cast upon it all. Yet, a deeper preparation is required for true tranquility. The mind, comfortable only with possibility, struggles with the blank space of what might be lost. We cannot prepare ourselves solely by contemplating virtue. We must also prepare for pain. This journey takes us to the practice of negative visualization. It sounds bleak, perhaps even melancholic, but it is in acknowledging absence that we find profound appreciation for presence. To visualize loss is not an act of despair, but an exercise in philosophical muscle memory. It teaches us what truly belongs to us and what must be released. We start by meditating on the things we take for granted: our health, our relationships, even the comfort of waking up tomorrow. We invite these thoughts into our minds, allowing ourselves to imagine their absence. This is a disciplined wandering into shadows. The initial reaction is often resistance, even panic. Our natural impulse is to deny these thoughts, to shove them away as if they were unwelcome intruders. But Stoicism asks us to meet these fears with steady contemplation, not emotional avoidance. We treat the hypothetical loss of a beloved object or the failure of a cherished plan simply as data points, as things that are possible, yet ultimately outside our complete control. This process forces a critical reevaluation of attachment. When we rehearse failure, we discover where our deepest roots of anxiety lie, not in the event itself, but in our rigid expectation that the event must be perfect. We find ourselves realizing how much energy we expend attempting to keep things flawless, hoping to prevent disappointment from ever touching us. Consider the loss of a simple possession, perhaps a keepsake given by a loved one, or even simply our sense of routine. When we imagine its disappearance, the initial sting fades, not because the object is returned, but because we acknowledge that the capacity to feel sadness is itself just an internal human function. We see emotion as powerful, yes, but also fleeting and manageable. The goal here is paradoxically twofold: profound gratitude for the present moment and calm acceptance of future lack. By rehearsing the worst-case scenario, not morbidly dwelling on it, but simply reviewing it logically. We strip the potential disaster of its emotional shock value. We transform the abstract fear into a tangible plan, realizing that even in loss, we retain our core self, our capacity to reason and respond thoughtfully. This is how we build resilience. We do not wait for life to strike us with an unexpected blow. Instead, we simulate those blows within the quiet sanctuary of our own minds. We ask ourselves, if this were gone, what remains? It is always our character. It is always our ability to choose a reasoned reply over an instinctive panic. The visualization doesn't teach us cynicism, it teaches us depth. It allows gratitude for the sun on our skin today to be more real, more absolute, because we have briefly glimpsed nights without light. The simple routine of breathing becomes an extraordinary gift when we contemplate breathlessness. Our relationships become sacred anchors when we visualize separation. Through these mental rehearsals, we detach from outcomes even more completely than before. We no longer cling to the expected success, nor do we fear catastrophic failure. We realize that life is a constant flow, marked by peaks and valleys of existence. To be prepared for both the bright zenith and the quiet descent, to meet them both with equal dignity, this is the ultimate measure of internal freedom. The negative visualization becomes our guardrail against despair. It is a radical act of self-mastery. By acknowledging what we may lose, we liberate ourselves from the tyranny of perfect expectation. We learn to inhabit the messy reality fully, accepting that life's true beauty is not its flawless symmetry, but its unpredictable, resilient unfolding. We reach a moment of conflict. A disagreement is unfolding, a heated conversation with a friend or perhaps a close colleague. This is the crucible where all previous lessons must converge. In moments like these, our nature instinctively pulls us toward reaction. We are trained to respond immediately, fueled by emotion, defensive, hurtful, defensive. It feels necessary to defend ourselves, to assert our viewpoint loudly and quickly. Today, something fundamental has shifted. The accumulated knowledge of control, the wisdom gained from unplugging, from accepting what cannot be changed, and from mastering the internal circle, allows a deliberate pause. The conflict escalates. Words are thrown like stones, accusations flying in rapid succession. Your instinct is to fire back instantly. Your heart pounds with adrenaline, your throat tightens with anticipated anger. Tano, you feel that familiar pull, but you intercept it. Instead of speaking, you take a deep breath. Another one follows, deeper still. The physical act of breathing becomes an anchor, rooting you momentarily outside the immediate storm of argument. This brief stillness is not withdrawal. It is preparation. We are learning to differentiate between reacting and responding. Reacting is impulsive, governed by gut emotion. It is the involuntary lashing out in a moment of pain or perceived threat. Response, however, is chosen. It is deliberate. It requires space, clarity, and the conscious application of reason. You realize that if you simply react, you are merely giving away your internal sovereignty to the emotional momentum of the other person. Taking those breaths grants you a precious gift: perspective. The urgency of the conflict fades slightly, allowing the rational mind to surface beneath the heat of immediate frustration. You remember what was taught in Chapter 4, the sacred boundary between the external event and your internal judgment. The disagreement itself is merely an outside event. It possesses no inherent moral weight, only its interpretation does. The conversation continues, fraught with misunderstanding and old grievances. The other person speaks from a place of their own uncontrolled fear or frustration. They expect agreement, they expect capitulation, and they are rapidly escalating the volume and intensity of their emotional display. Your initial impulse might be pity, wanting to soothe the outburst, but you remember that sympathy without boundary is simply enabling chaos. How should you proceed? If you respond defensively, you escalate the war. If you remain silent out of fear, you compromise your integrity. Response must therefore be a complex balancing act. It must be firm yet gentle, assertive yet empathetic. The discipline here is profound. It means pausing long enough to ask 3 simple questions before speaking. First, am I judging this moment based on my fears? Second, is the emotion I feel justified by fact alone? And third, what is the most virtuous action right now? The one that preserves both truth and dignity. This is where the journey from mere understanding to lived wisdom takes place. It is not enough merely to know that you should respond. You must perfect the muscle memory of resistance against impulse. You treat your own mind like a workshop, deliberately pausing before releasing any thought or word until it has passed through the necessary filters of logic and virtue. Then, you begin to speak, but unlike yesterday's outburst, your words carry weight and intention. They are not meant to win an argument. They are meant to clarify reality for yourself and gently guide the other person toward clarity too. You address the pattern of communication, not merely the content of the dispute. Instead of saying, "You are always wrong," you might say, "I hear your frustration, but I feel misunderstood regarding the effort put forth." This shift in language is everything. It shifts the focus from assigning blame, which only generates more heat, to describing subjective experience. It anchors the exchange in observable truth and felt reality. You are responding to the interaction as a whole, recognizing that both parties are caught in a cycle of mutual reaction. Maintaining this thoughtful pace is exhausting. Your muscles tense, your mind demands quick resolution. But you recall the lessons of acceptance, Amor, Fati. What if the perfect outcome never arrives? What if the other person refuses to listen? Your job at this moment is not to achieve harmony. Your job is to uphold your own moral character and intellectual integrity regardless of the external reception. It becomes a steady, measured rhythm, absorbing their complaint, allowing yourself the full sting of it, labeling the emotion, anger, fear, disappointment, and then replying with only what serves truth. You are performing an act of internal mastery in the middle of public friction. This is the ultimate test of freedom. The outcome of the argument may be messy. Perhaps reconciliation does not happen immediately, or perhaps the conversation dissolves into awkward silence. But those external results no longer hold the power to define your worth or determine your peace. What remains unshaken is the internal knowledge that you did not simply react. You acted deliberately from a place of trained virtue. You protected your minds and are quiet from being hijacked by external chaos, securing an enduring and profound sense of self-mastery. This discipline, practiced repeatedly in the heat of disagreement, confirms that true wisdom is less about possessing knowledge and more about mastering the pause between stimulus and action. After mastering the art of response in conflict and accepting that external events are not our concern, we arrive at a strange, quiet frontier, a place where there is nothing to do, nowhere to go, and nothing to measure. This new territory has a name: boredom. It sounds like an absence, but it is something profoundly rich. For so long, your mind has been trained by the relentless demands of modern life, the endless scroll, the constant stream of information, the urgent need to achieve or react. You have become accustomed to intellectual stimuli, and when those streams vanish, a deep discomfort sets in. At first, boredom is agonizing. It feels like an emptiness that must be filled immediately, as if silence itself were a vacuum demanding noise. Your fingers twitch toward the phone, seeking the familiar distraction, a headline, a notification, a mindless video loop. The mind rebels against inactivity, interpreting quietude not as a gift, but as a deficiency. You try to force thoughts, planning tomorrow's perfect day, reliving past mistakes, or analyzing the structural flaws of distant historical epochs. Anything is better than confronting the unadorned self that remains when all external props are removed. But this discomfort holds a profound lesson. The need for constant stimulation suggests that we have outsourced our internal landscape to the demands of the outside world. We mistake busyness for meaning and perpetual distraction for peace. This chapter requires a radical shift in perspective, learning to find value not in what occupies your attention, but in the state of paying attention itself. This is where boredom becomes the most luxurious of all gifts. It is the empty page upon which the authentic self finally gets to write without an audience. When the noise ceases, the echoes you have suppressed begin to surface. These are not just random thoughts. They are the unedited narratives of your soul. They are the quiet voices that were too muffled by comparison, too drowned out by crisis, or too urgent by reaction to ever be heard before. The initial flush of restlessness eventually passes. The craving for external stimulus gradually weakens. You learn to sit with the discomfort, to acknowledge it not as a failure, but as a signal, a clear indicator that your inner resources are finally being called home. This quiet space is inherently challenging, because the mind naturally gravitates toward novelty and quick hits of dopamine. It prefers the predictable sugar rush of the digital feed over the slow, steady burn of deep self-reflection. You must reframe boredom from a threat to an opportunity. See it as the pause button on your life. It is the momentary suspension required for the machinery of thought to finally quiet down and process its own workings. In this silence, the true questions emerge. What do I truly value when no one is watching? What assumptions have shaped my reactions? What parts of myself have I neglected because they did not generate any immediate content or measurable result? The self-posed question in boredom is simple, yet infinitely complex. If nothing external were to happen, who would still remain? Many seek meaning by accumulating things, experiences, connections, achievements. But the luxury of boredom forces us to realize that meaning is not an object to be found. It is a current state to be cultivated. It resides in the acceptance of what simply is. Just sitting there, breathing, allowing thoughts to drift through without judgment or attachment. This quiet mastery, the ability to find contentment in neutral stasis, is the truest form of resilience. The boredom you feel now is not merely an inconvenience. It is your internal calibration system resetting itself. It clears out the emotional residue left by years of reacting, predicting, and comparing. Each minute spent simply existing without agenda strengthens the sinew between your awareness and your judgment. You are retraining your mind to be at home in its own subtle presence. Embracing boredom is an act of radical self-trust. It suggests a faith that your inner life holds sufficient depth and complexity, that it does not require constant validation or diversion from the outside world. You begin to find rich patterns within simple repetition, profound truth within monotonous silence. This quiet resilience, this ability to be well with nothing happening, is far more valuable than any temporary high of engagement. It is where wisdom finally takes root, unburdened by noise and anticipation. The empty mind, it turns out, is not a vacant mind. It is a perfectly prepared vessel, ready to receive the steady light of self-understanding. We have traveled far from the noise. We began in a cycle of comparison, measuring our worth against the highlight reels of others. Our modern existence taught us to seek validation from outside sources. The likes, the views, the perfect photograph, the curated success story. It was exhausting, believing that peace could be achieved by accumulating external proofs of happiness. But every journey toward genuine wisdom must pass through a point of quiet recognition, the moment when the noise fades enough for us to hear our own steady voice. We learn to differentiate between what is within our control and what rests stubbornly beyond it. The chaotic currents of other people's judgment, market fluctuations, or unexpected delays were revealed to be not matters of power, but merely neutral facts. Our sovereignty was never outside. It resided only in the space between stimulus and response. The true challenge, then, ceased to be about avoiding setbacks or predicting every potential difficulty. It became simpler. How do we act when everything falls into place as it should? How do we operate when there is no audience, no applause, and no inevitable conclusion? Our focus shifted from mastering the outer world to mastering the inner calculus of value. We began to ask ourselves a fundamental question. What truly sustains the spirit? Is it the temporary glory of an external achievement, or is it something inherent within the fiber of one's own character? The wisdom we sought was not found in maximizing our output, but in minimizing our expectations for reward. We started practicing acts of service where the recipient would never know our effort, tasks performed simply because they align with a sense of justice and care. The act itself became the only necessary currency. There is a profound liberation in recognizing that giving value through action, wisdom applied justly, strength used kindly, is an end unto itself. It requires nothing back. It cannot be measured by likes or applause, or even quantified by success metrics. We learned that true worth is not something we gain. It is something we choose to embody. When we act solely from the internal dictates of virtue, when our intentions are pure, driven only by a desire for what is right and good, we divest ourselves of the most corrosive burden, the need for acknowledgement. The greatest shift was realizing that our moral compass must turn inward. External recognition is always fleeting. It fades with conversation, changes with fortune, and diminishes with distraction. But internal integrity, once established through conscious effort, remains constant. It builds a deep reservoir of self-trust that no external event can touch. Consider the power dynamic shift, from asking what will they think, to simply asking is this action virtuous. This reorientation is intensely powerful because it bypasses all human drama and all social performance. The only judge becomes the ideal we seek to embody within ourselves. The self, once enslaved by the desire for approval, finds freedom in anonymity. We realize that the purest form of goodness does not seek an audience. It simply exists as a reliable force within the world. Justice is done quietly. Wisdom speaks when needed, and courage acts without witnesses. This rediscovered currency, the unwavering commitment to acting justly merely because justice requires it, regardless of outcome, is the highest measure of human existence. It is self-contained. It requires no exchange. It is the final, complete return to the simple fact that we are responsible only for our intentions and our efforts. This understanding allows us to enter the world with a deep, resilient serenity. We move through setbacks not because they are unavoidable, but because we have already chosen where to place our value. The momentary loss of status, the disappointment of plans derailed, the inability to change the past, these moments no longer strike us as wounds, but as mere neutral information. The tranquility that emerges is not a state of passive apathy. It is an active, vigilant commitment to excellence in character. It is the fierce dedication to upholding one's internal moral standard, even when the world seems indifferent. This inner citadel becomes our truest inheritance, the wealth we carry with us, untouched by time or circumstance. Our life's goal shifts from seeking perfect happiness or flawless success to maintaining an unshakable integrity of being. And in that steady commitment, there is profound, lasting freedom. The journey was complete, yet the philosophy whispered that completion is itself merely a point of departure. Having faced the echoes of comparison, tasted the silence of boredom, and practiced radical acceptance, the self stood poised on a threshold. The world did not suddenly become pristine or easy. It remained messy, unpredictable, and inherently difficult. This new stillness demanded integration, a move from theory to pure lived experience. The mind settled into a deep rhythm, no longer frantic but watchful. It understood that virtue was not a destination reached after one great victory, but the constant state of careful attention paid to the immediate moment. But life, as always, had a way of presenting its indifferent obstacles. It came in the form of small physical discomforts and unexpected systemic strains, the kind of hardship that does not scream for philosophical understanding, but merely asks you to endure it. Perhaps a minor illness caught unawares, demanding a slowdown and withdrawing comfort. Perhaps an unforeseen financial strain forcing careful rationing. Or maybe simply the relentless grind of days stacking up, challenging the body's perceived limits. These were neutral facts, stripping away the illusions built by constant activity and superficial success. The initial reflex was predictable: worry. The internal alarm bells chimed, demanding explanation, a swift fix, an external shield to block out the ache or the emptiness. The old self would have immediately sought distraction, burying the discomfort beneath noise, work, or excessive consumption of comfort. But now, trained by the rigorous disciplines of detachment and acceptance, there was a pause, a deliberate space inserted into the natural flow of panic. This discomfort became the ultimate testing ground. It forced a confrontation with what remains after all the philosophical constructs are removed. Simply the self confronting raw reality. The protagonist learned that suffering is often less about the event itself, and more about the resistance we mount against it. To feel ill was not inherently tragic. To judge feeling ill as a catastrophic failure of life was the source of true anguish. The practice shifted from visualizing loss in abstract scenarios to dealing with lived, physical inconvenience. It required treating the present moment's limitation, the inability to run quickly, the necessity of delay, the lack of immediate resources, not as personal affronts or signs of failing destiny, but merely as data points. They were neutral information. The body's fatigue became a mere fact. The delayed schedule became an obstacle in logistics, nothing more. The inner dialogue was profoundly challenging here. It whispered temptations, blame, resentment toward fate, a yearning for the simpler times before this discomfort set in. Each time those emotions flared, each surge of impatience or worry about future capabilities, the disciplined gaze was turned inward, using the tools forged in previous chapters. The focus narrowed solely to what could be commanded in that instant: breath, posture, judgment. There is an immense power, realized through this sustained discomfort, in classifying these realities as merely outside of our primary locus of control. The wind blowing through a barren field remains indifferent whether we are grateful or resentful. The illness follows its course regardless of our wishes. We cannot command the physical world to conform to our desires for optimal comfort. Our sovereign space remained restricted entirely to the quality of attention and the intention behind one's response. This was true dignity. It was not the splendor of grand achievements, nor the temporary cushion of wealth or health. It was the quiet, unshakable knowing that even when stripped bare by hardship, when pain was present, when resources were thin, when moving forward required painful slowness, the integrity of one's character remained untouched and self-generating. The true struggle was not with the external difficulty, but maintaining that internal consistency under pressure. It demanded a relentless, conscious choice to interpret discomfort as an opportunity for disciplined attention, rather than interpreting it as proof of misfortune. And so, they learned to live within the gray area between things going wrong and realizing that nothing truly goes wrong. Only what we perceive is out of alignment with our internal peace. The world remained stubbornly indifferent, yet suddenly, its indifference was no longer a threat. It simply was. This acceptance, born in the deepest folds of discomfort, became the ultimate source of freedom, leading toward the final, transcendent view from tranquility. The journey began in the noise, a constant stream of comparison, a relentless flood of external expectation. At one point, finding yourself suspended between the frantic worry of tomorrow and the regret of yesterday, you realize that peace is not found in mastering the world around you, but in mastering the space within. This view from tranquility is where all previous lessons converge. It is the moment you finally step back and observe life not as a torrent of personal failures or external slights, but as a pattern of pure existence. The early days were marked by striving to achieve the perfect emotional state, strive to meet some imagined standard set by society or by others. This need for definition was exhausting, leading to an anxious grasp at outcomes that simply cannot be held. The self was always defined by what it lacked: less success, more recognition, better circumstances. But the truth of life, illuminated by wisdom, is far quieter than striving. It suggests a radical detachment from the premise that happiness must be earned through external achievement or validation. Tranquility is not the absence of storms. Rather, it is the deep certainty that you can remain whole even when those storms rage. The inner fortress remains untouched. The mind has been trained to search for answers in distraction, in more information, in another person's opinion, in the next perfect moment. Yet, true insight demands a different kind of labor: attention. It requires turning away from the captivating lure of the screen and toward the steady rhythm of your own breath. To look out at the world with fresh eyes is to see not merely what is beautiful, but what is unmodified by craving or fear. The view from tranquility teaches a profound redefinition of self-worth. It shifts the internal metric entirely. Value is no longer attached to titles, possessions, or even relationships. Instead, it resides solely in the integrity of your effort and the wisdom of your judgment. You discover that merely choosing to act with justice, simply because it is right, not because you expect applause or praise, is its own perfect reward. This choice becomes self-sustaining. Consider the passing nature of things. The buildings rise and fall, the moods shift like the tide, and the desires of others are fleeting whispers in the wind. To cling to any single outcome, any specific person, or even a stable feeling of enough, is to commit oneself to perpetual disappointment. Life flows through these moments, the harshness of the storm accepting itself into the cycle, the gentle persistence of the stream eroding the stone over time. There is only flow. The art of acceptance, Amor Fati, moves beyond mere endurance. It requires a joyful incorporation of everything that has happened, every difficulty and every unexpected deviation. You stop treating setbacks as cruel punishments and start recognizing them as necessary data points, the raw material for character. The mistake was always believing that a better circumstance would somehow exempt you from the work of self-mastery. This culmination brings a quiet power. When life presents disappointment, or inconvenience, or even genuine struggle, there is no panic response anymore. There is only the pause. A fraction of a second where the mind separates fact from judgment. You see the traffic jam not as a personal failing preventing an important meeting. You simply observe a collection of stationary metal objects held by human habit. The setback loses its narrative power. The practice of negative visualization, once an intellectual exercise, becomes a source of profound gratitude for the present. Having mentally rehearsed loss, the loss of health, the comfort of routine, even key relationships, you no longer experience the shock of deprivation when it inevitably arrives. You realize that while specific things will be taken away, the fundamental core of who you are remains resilient and untarnished by absence. The final state is not a fixed destination. It is a continuous, gentle vigilance. It is the profound understanding that freedom is nothing more than self-governance over your mind. You have learned to treat emotional turmoil as neutral data, just as merely observing the weather system, without judging it as good or bad. The external chaos becomes simply background noise for the exquisite clarity of an inner judgment. This quiet knowing allows you to look at the whole tapestry of life, the messy human drama, the unavoidable discomforts, the brilliant moments of grace, and see it all with equanimity. You are finally free from the exhausting tyranny of needing to be right, needing to achieve, or needing to belong. You simply exist within your own steady truth. The journey was not a sudden revelation, but a slow, steady unburdening. It had been an ascent from the frantic energy of external judgment to the quiet steadiness of internal sovereignty. Remembering the crushing weight of comparison and the dizzying speed of endless information streams, we now see how far the mind has traveled merely through persistent self-examination. We learned that seeking validation in the shifting sands of others' perception was not only fruitless but fundamentally corrosive. That desperate need to measure one's life against a filtered highlight reel of perfection eventually leads only to exhaustion and profound misalignment. But within the echo chamber, there is always the potential for silence. The journey demanded an unflinching willingness to unplug, to endure the discomfort of boredom, the modern anesthetic we rarely allow ourselves. It was in that quiet emptiness, in confronting what meant nothing at all, that the true inner landscape finally became visible. The central challenge remained, differentiating control. We learned early that, while the tides of fortune and the moods of others remain irrevocably outside our grasp, the sacred territory remains within us. The moment we recognized that judgment is not fact, but a personal choice of meaning, the whole architecture of anxiety began to crumble. This was more terrifying than any external disaster, because it demanded we trust in the untested landscape of our own mind. Acceptance evolved from mere resignation into an active embrace, the ethos of Amor Fati. It means seeing life not as something that happens to us, but as material out of which we are deliberately constructing ourselves. To resist the current is exhausting. To surrender to it and swim with its force is liberating. Every disappointment, every minor setback, was no longer a mistake requiring correction, but necessary data informing the process of becoming. Then came the rigorous practice of anticipation. We trained ourselves not to avoid difficulty, but to visualize it. By mentally rehearsing loss, we stripped potential pain of its shock power, transforming abstract fear into predictable resilience. This exercise confirmed that our deepest vulnerability was not external, but residing in rigid expectations about how life should behave. The moments of conflict became crucibles for applied philosophy. No longer did impulse dictate action. Instead, there was the deliberate pause, a breath drawn deep enough to create separation between feeling and choice. To respond thoughtfully required maintaining an internal standard of integrity, prioritizing truth over simply winning the argument. This mastery over reaction proved that our true strength resided not in our arguments, but in our ability to remain governed by reason. The culmination was understanding where genuine worth resides. It is not granted by praise, nor confirmed by achievement, nor even guaranteed by virtue itself, which can occasionally be overlooked. True dignity emerges simply from the act of committing oneself wholly to excellence, to justice, temperance, and wisdom, simply because it aligns with what one believes is right. The weight we once carried, believing peace was a destination achieved only after conquering external circumstance, has been lifted. We realize now that true tranquility is not the absence of storm. Rather, it is the constant self-governance over the mind's response to every inevitable storm. This understanding, that our freedom resides solely in the choice of how we care for our own minds, is the final, profound affirmation. It is not a shield against hardship, but a permanent state of watchful consciousness. The lesson is simple yet revolutionary. While life will always remain messy, uncertain, and unpredictable, you retain the single, powerful sovereignty of choosing your response. This choice, reaffirmed after this long journey, becomes the unwavering center of one's being, allowing for a steady, dignified presence in the midst of beautiful chaos. The journey is never a destination. It is the practice itself. We have learned that peace is not a final state of achievement, nor is it a gift granted by external circumstances. It is built moment by painstaking moment, through the continuous, conscious work of returning attention to the internal self. The world outside continues its relentless rhythm. The traffic still snarls, disappointments still arrive unbidden, and others will inevitably continue to compare their painted moments against our lived reality. But now, the frantic need for perfection has dissolved into a quiet understanding that the pursuit of an external ideal was the very engine of suffering. We have learned that freedom does not mean the absence of struggle. It means the constant sovereignty over how we choose to meet the inevitable resistance. The deepest wisdom is found in recognizing that life's greatest truths are revealed not in moments of triumph, but in the steady persistence through mundane difficulty. This understanding transforms practice from a set of isolated techniques into a profound way of being. It means carrying forward the awareness gained, the ability to pause before judgment, to breathe deeply before reaction, and to examine every fleeting thought with philosophical curiosity. It is choosing thoughtful response over impulsive lashing out, not because it is easier, but because it aligns the mind with its highest self. We have mastered the art of differentiation, distinguishing the sphere of what we can control, our judgments, our intentions, our effort, from the vast, chaotic expanse of everything else. This distinction remains the single greatest gift and the most demanding discipline. When setbacks strike, the immediate instinct may be to feel victimized or outraged by injustice. But now, the training allows us to pause, treating the event merely as neutral data. The missed connection is not a catastrophe. It is simply an inconvenience that requires a measured adjustment of plan. The acceptance we cultivated, Amor Fati, has moved beyond passive tolerance. It is an active embrace, a delight in what is happening, even when difficult, because we understand that every difficulty is necessary fuel for the forge of character. We do not merely endure, we incorporate. We integrate the discomfort, realizing that resilience itself requires the very friction of struggle to be built. Consider the enduring nature of wisdom. It asks nothing in return. It does not require applause, nor does it promise a guaranteed pleasant life. Its currency is self-consistency, the unwavering commitment to acting justly, speaking truthfully, and considering others' humanity regardless of our own emotional state or need for validation. This constant dedication becomes the true architecture of a well-lived life. Furthermore, we carry with us the discipline of negative visualization. We have learned that acknowledging potential loss strips away its phantom power. By mentally preparing for difficulty, the failing of health, the departure of beloved faces, the erosion of comfort, we diminish anxiety from an unknown threat into merely a manageable probability. Gratitude, therefore, is not just a pleasant emotion. It is a disciplined act of remembrance, honoring the present moment that we now know to be precious and fleeting. The continuous practice, then, demands vigilance. It means remembering daily that the inner self is always under siege by distraction, comparison, and the siren call of instant emotional gratification. The modern world constantly pushes us toward reactivity, demanding immediate response, assuming absolute certainty, and valuing speed over depth. To counter this pull requires cultivating a profound love for boredom, treating stillness not as empty time, but as the essential crucible where true thought emerges. This mastery is also accepting our own imperfections. We are still prone to momentary lapses in judgment. We will stumble back into old patterns of worry or self-pity. The Stoic discipline, therefore, is not about achieving perfect virtue and remaining untouched by flaw. It is about the humility required to notice those falls, the recognition that one has strayed from their own internal compass, and the courage to gently reorient oneself back toward reasoned principle. This journey does not conclude with a sudden flash of enlightenment or an insurmountable fortress of calm. The final wisdom whispers that tranquility is fluid. It requires the daily recommitment, the conscious choice, breath after breath, to prioritize self-governance over circumstance, to choose rational thought when emotion shouts louder, to choose dignity when comfort beckons compromise. We learn that the greatest luxury is not abundance, but attention, the ability to focus without distraction, to see reality as it simply is, devoid of our dramatic needs or anticipated outcomes. This steady vigilance, this mindful engagement with the simple reality of being alive, becomes the ultimate source of peace. The practice continues indefinitely, a quiet marathon of the soul, confirming that self-mastery is not merely possible. It is the only true human achievement. The power was never outside us to be seized or earned. It resided always within the disciplined space between the event and our conscious response.